He had $650,000 saved by 30, and he couldn't let himself spend 12,000 of it. I want to tell you something that took me an embarrassingly long time to understand about myself. By 30, Priya and I had built something most people spend their whole careers chasing, and I spent most evenings at that kitchen table staring at the numbers like they were a warning, not a win. The laptop open, a watch catalog I'd ordered and never mentioned to anyone sitting face down beside the mousepad. I wasn't anxious in a way that looked like anxiety. I was calm, organized, productive. The kind of person who color codes a savings tracker on a Sunday afternoon and calls it relaxing. But underneath all that careful order was something I hadn't examined in years, a fear that had long since outlived the thing that created it. The numbers, if you want them, are these: $390 in a taxable brokerage, $80,000 in a Roth, $77 in the 401k, $27 in an HSA, and $30 in a high-yield savings account. Combined with Priya's accounts, we had $650,000 at 30 years old. Mortgage locked at 2.8%, a payment we could cover on one salary if we had to. Zero consumer debt, not a dollar on a credit card that wasn't paid in full the same month. On paper, we were not just fine, we were genuinely ahead. I knew that intellectually the way you know a fact you read in a textbook. I just couldn't feel it anywhere useful. The watch had been in my head since I was 19, not a flex piece. I want to be clear about that. It was a mechanical dress watch, the kind with an exhibition caseback where you can see the movement working through the sapphire. I'd seen one in a magazine at my uncle's house, and I remember thinking, when I make it, that's how I'll know. It became a private promise, the specific shape of what enough looked like to me. $10,000 to $12,000, which by 30 was less than 2% of what we had saved. I knew the math. I'd done the math. And yet, saying the number out loud felt like tempting something I couldn't name. My 30th birthday fell on a Thursday. I'd blocked 2 hours in the afternoon and told Priya I had a client errand, which was technically not a lie, in the way that most self-deceptions are technically not lies. I drove to the boutique in the downtown arcade, found parking on the first try, which I took as a sign. The store was quiet. I looked at the watch for 11, maybe 12 minutes. I asked one question about the caseback finish, and then I thanked the man behind the counter and walked out into the gray morning with my hands in my pockets and told myself, not yet. Conditions weren't right. I'd know when the time was right. I drove back to the office and did not mention any of it to Priya. That evening, Priya asked how the errand went. I told her most of it, but maybe not all of it, but enough. She sat with me on the couch and listened the way she listens, which is fully, without reaching for her phone or finishing my sentences. When I stopped talking, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked, "What number would be enough, Caleb?" She wasn't being sharp about it. She wasn't frustrated. She asked it the way she asks things at work, I imagine. Clinically precise, because she actually wants to know the answer. I didn't have one. I opened my mouth and sat there, and the silence was louder than anything I could have said. I know exactly where the fear started. I was 11 years old. My father came home one Wednesday, middle of the week, middle of the day, and sat in the kitchen without taking his coat off. He'd been laid off after 14 years at the same plant. I remember the coat details specifically. He just sat there in it. My mother, Lorraine, didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She pulled out a legal pad, same yellow ones I still use, and started writing columns. That winter, she rationed the heating without telling me that's what she was doing. She just said we liked it a little cooler. It was years before I understood what that sentence had cost her to say. Lorraine never said, "We don't have enough." She said, "We're being careful." And being careful became the highest virtue in our house. More than generosity, more than joy, more than rest. Safety lives in the account, not in the spending, not in the enjoying. That was the lesson, and I absorbed it the way kids absorb everything, completely, without questioning whether it was meant to be permanent. She was right, for that time and that crisis. The lesson saved us. I just never asked myself whether a lesson built for scarcity was still the right one to live by when the scarcity was gone. And nobody thought to tell me there was supposed to be a second lesson. At work, Declan Walsh had been noticing things I was actively not noticing. Declan is the kind of guy whose desk always has a coffee ring that's been there since Tuesday, who loosens his tie by 9:15, who somehow still produces cleaner client files than anyone else in the office. He'd mentioned the vacation thing once before, but I'd deflected it. This time, he leaned on the partition by my desk and said with genuine affection that my spreadsheets were allergic to the word fun. He said he'd gone back through the shared calendar and I hadn't taken a real week off in 3 years. "You've got more PTO banked than people who've been here since the 90s, he said. I laughed. I laughed very easily and very quickly, which is something I've noticed I do when something lands too close. That night, I sat down at the small desk in the home office, not the kitchen table, the quieter one, and I tried to list every discretionary thing I'd spent money on in the past 12 months that was purely for pleasure. Not the mortgage, not the groceries, not the oil change. Just the things I bought because I wanted them, and they made life better in no measurable way. The list was one item. A book. $8. I stared at that for a while. Then I wrote Priya's name at the top and tried to think of what I'd done for her, for us. That was just indulgent and unapologetic. 2 years married, 1 anniversary dinner at the Thai place because it was fine and we like it. I closed the legal pad and sat there with the lamp on, which suddenly felt like the smallest, saddest form of treating myself. So I did what any CPA does when he's uncomfortable. I built a model. I called it the disaster audit. Every realistic scenario where something went wrong. The roof fails. I priced it out at 18 to 22,000, ran the hit against the HYSA buffer, emergency fund, then brokerage. Job loss. Mine, then Priya's, then both simultaneously. Medical emergency. Long-term disability. I used conservative recovery assumptions, pessimistic market returns, the kind of numbers you use when you're trying to scare yourself into safety. I had 4 browser tabs open and 2 legal pads going, and I was at the kitchen table until after midnight. It felt like productive anxiety, which is what I had instead of rest most nights. Every scenario passed, every single one. The emergency fund covered the roof twice over. The brokerage absorbed a 6-month dual job loss without touching the retirement accounts. The disability scenario was the closest call, and it still resolved inside 2 years. I had built the most thorough case for financial safety I had ever seen in a personal context, and I was a CPA. I knew what thorough looked like. I leaned back in the chair and crossed my arms and looked at the screen for a long time. The numbers said, "You're fine. You've been fine. You will be fine." And the thing in my chest that I'd been carrying since I was 11 years old did not move 1 inch. That was the part I didn't know what to do with. I told Priya about the audit the next morning. She was at the counter, rust-colored robe, pouring coffee, and she listened while I walked her through the scenarios and the outcomes. When I finished, she turned around and said very quietly, "So, you've now proven we can afford the watch." I said there were still variables I hadn't. She stopped me. "Caleb, the math isn't the problem." She didn't say it unkindly. She handed me my mug and went to get ready for her shift, and I stood there at the counter holding the coffee, knowing she was completely right, having no idea what to do with that information. So I went back. 3rd time in 2 weeks, which I told myself was research. The owner, quiet older man, silver hair, white shirt pressed like a habit, brought it out without me asking. Set it on the velvet pad and stepped back. I picked it up, and this time I fastened it on my wrist. The weight of it was specific in a way I hadn't expected. Not heavy, just intentional, the way a well-made thing always feels different from what you imagined. I stood there reading the dial like it was a contract, looking for the clause that would tell me I was making a mistake. I found nothing. I handed it back anyway. The owner didn't push. That was the thing. He had this patience that felt almost practiced, the kind you earn from watching the same scene play out over 30 years behind the counter. He said it quietly, almost to himself. The people who agonize most over this purchase are always the people who can best afford it. He wasn't trying to close me. He was just telling me something true. I remember I nodded like I'd heard it, but the words were still landing somewhere slower in me, finding the place they were meant to hit. I almost did it. My phone was in my hand. Apple Pay. 1 tap. Done. I had the exact balance in my head. The HYSA would barely notice a $12,000 withdrawal, not with what was sitting above the emergency threshold. Every rational part of me knew this. And then, I don't know how to describe it exactly, a frame from the winter I was 11 dropped into the middle of my thinking. My mother at the kitchen table, gas bill in one hand, calculator in the other, saying nothing. I pocketed my phone, thanked him, walked out into a gray afternoon that felt colder than it was. I lay awake that night going through everything we hadn't done. Not in a self-pity way, more like an auditor who finally opened the wrong file. 3 years in this city, and we'd never taken a real trip. The furniture we bought when we moved in was still the furniture. Both our anniversaries, the same Thai place 2 blocks over, the same corner table, same pad CU. Priya never complained. That was almost worse. She'd built her life around my caution so quietly I'd stopped noticing the shape of it. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I spent money on something that was purely just for us. I couldn't land on anything. I caught Declan in the break room the next morning before the floor got loud. I wasn't planning to say anything. I just poured my coffee and then heard myself ask, what does it actually cost to not spend money? Like, over time, what's the real number? He was mid-joke about something else, and he just stopped, set his mug down, looked at me like I'd asked a question he'd been carrying around himself for a while. That, he said, is the question nobody runs. Not a punchline, no follow-up. He meant it. Declan told me about a senior partner at his old firm, spent 40 years building the kind of retirement account that should have meant anything was possible. Retired at 62 in good shape, clear mind, healthy enough. Had a stroke at 64. Declan said he never took the trip to Ireland he'd talked about since the 80s, kept saying he'd go when things settled, when the kids were done with school, when the market was less volatile. When? Declan was looking out the break room window when he told me this. His coffee had gone cold. He always had a reason, he said. The reasons never stopped being real. He just never went. I came home that evening and sat down at the kitchen table, same chair, same laptop, and opened a brand new spreadsheet tab. I actually named it. I called it the permission model, which felt almost embarrassing to type, but I typed it anyway. Not a disaster audit, not another worst-case column. I wanted to know what $12,000 actually cost the retirement plan, written out in math I couldn't argue with. Priya's cardigan was folded over the chair across from me. The house was quiet. I started building. I ran it 3 ways. First, pull $12,000 directly from the brokerage, model the opportunity cost forward to 65 at 7% average return, see what I actually give up. Second, redirect $200 a month from discretionary cash flow, no lump sum, no brokerage touch, retirement date unchanged. Third, take it from the HYSA buffer. We had $42,000 sitting there, well above the 6-month emergency floor, and the purchase would leave 30 intact. Every path I ran, the retirement date didn't move, not a month. The math kept saying the same thing. I kept checking it. Then I added a second line, something Declan's story had put there, and I couldn't take out. I tried to estimate the rough cost of the things we hadn't done. 2 vacations over 3 years. Portugal was the one Priya had mentioned twice, and I'd let die both times. Call it $8,000 to $10,000 total. The small things, nicer dinners, a piece of furniture we actually chose, one weekend somewhere that wasn't a work trip. I built a conservative estimate. The number wasn't catastrophic. It was something else. It was the shape of a choice I'd made every single day without calling it a choice. I sat with the pen tapping the table for a long time. I called my mother, not to ask her anything. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't calling to get permission, and I wasn't calling to report. I just needed to tell someone what I'd figured out, and she was the person whose kitchen had taught me the lesson I was now trying to revise. I told her about the permission model. I told her the numbers held. She listened all the way through without interrupting, which for Lorraine means she's thinking hard. Then she said something I had never heard her say in 30 years. I wish your father and I had taken one good trip. Just that. No explanation, no qualifier. The line sat on the phone between us like something she'd been holding for a while. She didn't say it as advice. She said it the way you mentioned something you stopped being angry about a long time ago, but never quite finished grieving. After the call, I stood in the kitchen for a while, not moving. I thought about how precisely I had replicated her system. The legal pad, the disaster columns, the no, that came before the yes could even finish forming. She built that system to survive something real. It worked. And then it just kept running, past the moment it was needed, into my adulthood, into my marriage, into a boutique on a Tuesday where I handed back a watch I could afford. The discipline that kept her family afloat had never been told it could stop. I found Priya in the living room and told her I wanted to show her something. I opened the laptop on the kitchen table, our table, the anxiety's home address, and pulled up the permission model. Not the disaster audit, the new one. She read it the way she reads things, completely, once, without asking questions until she's done. Then she looked up and said, "So we can go to Portugal and get the watch?" She wasn't being glib. She was asking a real question, and the real answer was yes. And something about hearing her say it out loud made the yes feel different than it ever had inside my own head. That night, we did something we had never actually done in 3 years of careful saving. We made a budget for living. Not a budget that said no, one that said, here is what we are allowed to enjoy, on purpose, every year. Priya pulled out a fresh notebook, not my laptop, not a spreadsheet, her actual handwriting, and wrote, "Life budget" at the top of the first page. We settled on a number for experiences and one meaningful object annually, protected by the same discipline that built the brokerage. It was smaller than I expected, and it felt, for the first time, like a plan that included us. I sat with that notebook the next morning, alone, coffee going cold, and something landed that I had been avoiding for 3 years. I'd been telling myself the whole time that I was being disciplined, and I was. But discipline without a finish line, without a reward built into the structure, is just fear. Fear with a cleaner name. The spreadsheet was real. The math was real. But the reason I kept running disaster scenarios instead of permission models was not caution. It was that I did not believe, somewhere underneath the numbers, that I had actually earned the right to be okay. I am a CPA. I've read the literature on sustainable financial planning more times than I can count, and I know, I've always known, that a plan requiring permanent self-denial is statistically less likely to hold. People drift from plans that punish them. They blow past savings targets in a single emotional weekend, then feel shame, then drift further. A plan that includes a deliberate spend, bounded and protected, is more stable than one built on nothing but restraint. I knew this professionally. I had just never applied it to myself. There is a specific kind of embarrassment in discovering you are the client you would have helped years ago. I messaged Declan on Friday, buying the watch tomorrow. He read it in 30 seconds flat and sent back a single thumbs up and the word "finally" in capitals. That was it. No follow-up, no explanation required. He had been waiting for this message for longer than I had. I put the phone face down on the desk and sat there for a minute, and the feeling was not excitement exactly. It was something closer to the moment before you sign a document you have already decided to sign. Calm, irrevocable, correct. Saturday morning, Priya had never actually been inside the boutique. I had gone twice alone, both times like a man visiting a building he couldn't quite enter. This time we walked in together, her hand through my arm, her asking questions about the arcade before we even got to the door. She was curious in the way she is about most things, openly, without self-consciousness. I was nervous, but it was a different kind of nervous than before. The old nervous was about catastrophe. This one was about doing something real. The owner, same man, silver hair, crisp white shirt, that same mild, unhurried energy, recognized me before I said a word. He did not make a thing of it. He simply went to the case, brought the watch out, and set it on the velvet counter the way you'd set down something that was already ours and had just been held there for safekeeping. "I thought you'd be back," he said. Not smug, just accurate. Priya looked at it, then looked at me, and I could see her doing what she always does, reading the room faster than I can. Priya picked it up before I did. She turned it over, read the case back. She does not know much about watchmaking, and she was not pretending to. Then she looked up at me and fastened it on my wrist herself. She did not say anything. I did not say anything. The boutique owner had the sense to let that moment exist without narrating it. The watch was heavier than I remembered from the last time I held it, or maybe I was just paying attention differently. Everything I had told myself would go wrong if I relaxed. None of it was happening. I tapped my phone. The confirmation came back in a second, a small glow on the screen, a number I had already decided was the right number to spend. And then I waited. Old habit. I waited for the feeling of having made a terrible mistake. It did not come. The ceiling did not fall. The account was fine. I knew it was fine because I had run the model 4 different ways. What arrived instead was something I did not have a category for, which was just stillness, the kind you don't manufacture, the kind that shows up when the math and the life finally agree. Walking out, Priya asked if I felt different. I thought about it for half a block before I answered, which is the only honest way I know how to answer anything. It doesn't feel like spending, I told her. It feels like the math working the way it was supposed to. She laughed, not at me, with me, and said that was the most CPA thing she had ever heard me say outside of an office. She wasn't wrong, but it was also true. We had built something, and for the first time I let myself use it, and the structure held. That was the whole point. A week later, on a regular Tuesday, I sat at the kitchen table with coffee, the same table where the disaster audits lived, where the anxiety used to set up its spreadsheets, and the watch was on my wrist, and the new notebook was open, and the fear was not there. Not suppressed, not held at arm's length, just not there. That is what I want to say. If any of this sounds familiar, patience is not the practice of saying no forever. It is building the clarity to know when yes is the right answer and why. That distinction is the whole game. Everything else is just the math holding the space open until you're ready to use it. If you have built real savings and you still cannot feel safe spending $1 of it, I want to ask you one thing. Have you ever actually run the permission model? Not the disaster audit, not the worst case loop, but the model that asks what this purchase actually costs the plan. Run that one. You might find what I found, which is that the math was never the obstacle. And if you want to understand how compounding actually works, how the numbers build on themselves over time, and why starting now beats starting perfect, the first lesson of Greed's Kingdom is free. Link is right below. No pressure. Just the math, told plainly. He finally bought the watch. But do you think the fear actually went away, or just changed shape? Tell me below.